You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guest about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. I started my CX consulting company 4 years ago. Now, while I've learned a ton and I feel so much more seasoned than when I got started, I continue to lean on the wisdom of those who have gone before me, those who have a wealth of experience, those who have seen the good and the bad of CX. It really is a wonderful community filled with people willing to share and connect. And that's the beauty of today's guest. Today's guest, Elaine Lee of Reynolds Busby Lee, embodies that spirit. With 16 plus years of consulting, she's seen just about everything. I've learned so much in CX and have been amply inspired to follow her model of connectivity. She's been so giving with her knowledge and in introductions. And even an earlier podcast guest, Gavin Scott, and I only know each other because of Elaine's introduction. As we head to the UK today to talk with Elaine, I'm eager to learn even more from her. She is a seasoned marketer with a particular passion for customer experience. Her experience weaves through commercial and charity, and it isn't just ivory tower. She's done the work. Today's going to be great. Elaine, welcome to CX Passport.
Hey, Rick. I'm so pleased to be here.
I am pleased as well. So all of us in the CX community talk about living in this outside-in model, one that considers the customer's perspective in our design and our decisions. Yet we know often that we really aren't a replica of our customer. How do you approach looking outside in?
Well, you and I have had many conversations over the last few months, and you know that I'm slightly passionate about thinking from the customer, and the starting point for me is about knowing your customer. Not who you think they are, but find out who they really are. And there's going to be different cohorts of customers within the customer base. So they're not all the same. They don't look the same. They don't sound the same. Their motivations to purchase will be different. And so just don't average them out. Don't make them one big amorphous blob of customer and you assume that get it right for one, you've got it right for them all. No, and none of the customers wants to think they're average. Would you want to be described as average Joe, or do you want to be Rick Denton? You know,
I'm not really a big fan of being meh or average. You're right.
Yeah. So as customers, we don't want to feel that we're the average customer. We want to feel as though we are on somebody's radar, that they care about us and that they're interested in what we want and how we want to interact with them. And then I think it's about, so get to know who your customers are. And the best way to do that is to talk to your customers, spend some time with them. I know, shocking.
Gasp. Wait, talk to a customer? What visions are these, Elaine? But yes.
I know. It's like, the hubble bubble boil in trouble, cauldron of joy, but it's very topical. But given the way approaching Halloween, I think for me, you need to spend some time either physically with customers. If you're in a retail environment, get in the store, go and spend some time with them. If you're not and you have a distance selling business and you're direct to consumer, then sit in the contact center, get on the phone, go and talk to them, try and have a go, see if you can do the job of those call center agents, and talk to the customer, hear what they've got to say. If you ask them to fill in a survey, read the results and read all of the results, not just the bits that you want. Have a look at social media. What are people saying? Google yourself, see what people are saying, but not tagging you, because that can be quite insightful too.
Right.
And you just got to hear their voices. So
that, and Elaine, what's so both, I guess, fascinating and frustrating about what you've just said there is that's exactly right. Go live the life of the customer, go experience it, go sit in the contact center, just like you described. And it amazes me how that just doesn't happen that often. You've worked with companies. Why are companies not living the life of the customer? Why, and in some cases, why aren't they even shopping their own product? Right. So maybe even
scary.
Being a customer. Tell me about that. What do you see? What's the why here?
So there's a couple of reasons that I've come across in my many years doing this. One is that contact centers are undervalued.
Yeah.
And it's simplified as a job that's how hard can that be? Actually, when you talk to your customers every day and listen to them and hear them berating you for things that aren't your personal fault, that can be quite tough or quite emotionally challenging if their customers are offloading all sorts of complexities at you all day. people are frightened about actually going and hearing it, because then there is no hiding from it. There is no excuse that can be made if you can't explain it to a customer. That you just can't get away from it. And also, well, I've got somebody else to do that for me. That's their job. Okay, but you have to still listen. And, if you don't hear that voice, you don't know which direction to go in, and you can make assumptions, and we all know. Assumptions.
Don't make me have to put the explicit tag on this episode, but yes, we do know what the assumptions are. I have found, Elaine, one of the most valuable tools that I've used in consulting. I imagine you've used the same exact thing, and it is these call listening, these customer listening sessions. So if I go into a company that is not actively doing like you're describing, then I'll sit the team down, whatever that team means, leadership team, executive team, whatever it looks like, and plop them down and just play calls. I won't even have a lot of curated in the sense of, okay, it's not just a transactional call, but there's not a lot of surrounding. It's just, we're just going to listen. And I want you to react to what you hear. And it is amazing to see the eyes get wide, or the hands go to the palm, or what it looks like when we actually listen to our customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right. I do that, and I do that in training environments too, where we sit and we workshop through a call. So this is the call, and this is what happened the first time. So we're just going to listen to it. And you're right. There are heads in hands, and there are, all cringing going on. And then we work through it and sort of look at, well, how could we have handled that section of the call, and what did the customer tell us without actually saying the words? Where were the deep pauses? Where were the sighs from the customer? Why did the agent overtalk them? The customer came on the phone, said they had 3 things to tell us, and we only dealt with 2 of them. Why did we do that? So that's because we got carried away in what we do. The other thing we do, and it was an American bank that I came across who first did this back in the late 90s. And every member of staff spends 1 hour a month on the phones. Whether you are CEO or financial director, or you are social media manager, you go and spend an hour on the phones, or if you look after the database, and everybody's trained to be able to do it. And you have to spend an hour on the phone and talk to your customer. And I just think it's a brilliant philosophy, because it makes you face up to your fear.
Oh, I love it. Face up to your fear. You may have just given me the show title, but we'll see. We've got so much good nuggets. That was only the first second question. And here we are with so much juice. I know that I don't video these. And so, but if the audience could see me, my neck is getting sore from nodding so aggressively with what Elaine is saying. It is brilliant. Elaine, I want to go back to something you said kind of at the beginning. You talked about, we don't want to just lump everybody together and design for the average. But I think something else that's important is we often design for the quote ideal customer. Well, then I think I know the answer to this question. Is there really such a thing? What are the pitfalls of designing for the ideal?
So the ideal customer is your CEO, who thinks that that's how everybody behaves. And it's not true, because every one of us is unique, and we all have different motivations and different thought process and different moods. And if you catch me on one day, I'll react like this. You catch me 20 minutes later, something's just happened, I'm in a totally different mood. And I'll react very differently. There is no one ideal customer, because actually, if you let customers be customers, they will teach us things about our business that we just didn't anticipate. And we'll learn from them about what do they want, and it gives us ideas and directions to go in. And if we just come in at it with a blinkered view of the world, saying this is the direction we're going in, this is what our ideal customer will do, we never learn and grow as a business. And we don't hear about opportunities, and we don't hear what we do well, and we should do more of, and we don't hear what we do badly, and we should do less of, and we don't see the opportunities. So the ideal customer, I've never met one, and I've met many customers in my life, but I've never met one, and I've probably certainly never been one.
Where we've never met the ideal customer. I like that. So, right, I've heard the word hear, I've heard listen, see. So much of everything you're describing requires that we understand that voice of the customer. That outside-in approach requires voice of the customer. And we get that. We certainly get that in the CX community. But something that at least I don't think we talk enough about is, how do we design a VOC program so that the customer wants to give us their voice? How do you go about that, where it's not so much forced, but the customer is wanting to give us that voice?
So often companies I've come across and have worked with in the past have set up a program, and it's kind of the people who want to tell you are the people who either had a really terrible experience or a really great experience. And the people in the middle who it was just okay. they don't really want to say, what's the point of me telling you, because adds no value to me. And it's about trying to find a way of getting under the skin of those customers. So knowing who they are, what motivates them, and actually just asking questions, not as one massive question or survey, or fill in this 50-page questionnaire and we'll give you 10 pence off your next order. You need to, what you want to do is ask them questions as they're navigating through the journey, just little pops of a question, and it's kind of pulsing the experience as you go. What's it like? What's it, how's it going? And for me, it's around, let's understand what's happening right now, and what do we want to happen? So what's our ideal journey for the customer, not the company who's the ideal customer, because I can't create people, but I can create and design journeys for them. So what have we got? What do we want, or what do we think is happening? And then what's the gap? What's that, that big gap analysis, and how do we get from here to here and make things better? But unless you understand what the experience of the customer actually is, rather than what you think it is, you'll never get a proper gap analysis.
It is so, I'm chuckling just because, again, it's fascinating and frustrating all at once, because what we're describing, this isn't a podcast around how do we design a rocket engine. And so what we're describing are relatively simple concepts, and yet are so difficult. They're simple. There was a guest that once said it's simple, but it's not easy. And I think that's something that sticks in my head when we talk about this. Now, let's take a little pivot here, because I want to talk a little bit about travel. So someone you and I both know, Sharon Boyd, and this is way back in episode 2. So she was one of my early guests, but she referred to the concept of eating your own dog food as a way to ensure that the design of your CX that your customers will want, right? Shop your own product. But I want to take a little different turn with you. That applies to travel as well. You said to me when we were talking earlier that we often fail to be tourists in our own cities. And I know you've recently done that. So tell me about eating your own dog food as a tourist in your own city.
Well, for me, it started whilst I was at uni, so 420 years ago now. And when I left, I finished my exam term, I was the first of my friends to finish. And it was like, well, what should we do? And nobody really wanted to go home just because we finished the exams. It's like, well, do you know what? We've lived in this city for 3 years. We don't really know. We know where the pubs are. We know where the clubs are. We know where the parks are. But actually, I went to university in a city called Hull, which is in the northeast of England. And it's got all sorts of kind of history to it in terms of slave trade, and it's got its own communication system. It's the only city outside in the UK that has its own telephone network. And it's like, well, why is this? What goes on here? So we went for a day out. We went for exploring, and we went to the Wilberforce House, and we went out and we just had a good nosy around our city, and we ended up in the Transport Museum. And my best friend and I, Kate, we lived in a street that the university owned, so the student-owned house, student houses, and there were lots of different years, all first, second, and third years, and the group of us all went from across the year group, and we just had an absolute riot exploring what was going on under our noses, and it was like, God, why haven't we ever done this before? And so that kind of sparked this kind of, we need to be tourists in our own cities mentality. And now, I grew up in Liverpool, left in 96 for work, had to come to London. But when I go home, my hometown's changed massively. It's had huge European funding investment.
Oh, yeah.
The city, the shopping centre is now what was the bus station. So I get lost in my own city all the time now, which is fantastic because I get to discover things. And it's brilliant because you kind of discover things that you knew nothing about. And then with the world in my pocket on my mobile phone, I can Google and see what's going on. And when I moved to London, I think it was another moment for me, because you kind of, when you go around London, you kind of follow the tube map and think, right, well, I've got to go from here to here. And it's only actually when you come above the surface and you walk, and there are 2 tube stations that are literally 100 yards from one another, Charing Cross and Embankment. And I can remember getting on the train and changing at to go at Embankment to get round to Charing Cross. And I came above surface and slapped my own forehead. It's like, what have I done? I could have walked it, and I'd walked like 6 miles underground. It's like, I've got to explore my city. And especially in London, you wander around and there's just loads of interesting things that have gone on. The city's been here for hundreds of years, and I know very little about it. So I'm a curious soul. My family would tell you I'm a nosy old bat, but I would like to describe myself as a curious soul. So I like to explore.
Elaine, what a brilliant talk about going and being a tourist in your own city. I imagine after discovering that you had taken this incredible tube ride and only advanced 100 yards and some of the other explorations, there were times that you wanted a nice rest. And so let's have that rest here. Why don't you join me here in the First Class Lounge? Let's have a little bit of fun here. I'd like to know a dream travel location from your past.
Well, firstly, it's very exciting that I get to go left on the plane rather than right and head right to the back seat for the
Yes.
But oh my God, there are so many places in dream travel locations from my past. I think the Maldives. Went there for my honeymoon, and unless we sort out the environmental challenges, that's not going to be there forever.
Right.
A tiny weeny bit of Australia when we went and stayed. We did a house swap and stayed on the Sunshine Coast, and then we did a little island, an eco island on the bottom of the Barrier Reef, which was fantastic.
Nice.
Paris, where my husband proposed to me, which was supposed to be quite romantic. I had to tell him, would you get down on one knee? That'd be quite nice. But I think I'm going to go with Cuba as my dream destination.
Oh, jealousy. As an American, I am extremely limited and really effectively prohibited from going there. Tell me more about Cuba.
So Cuba was one of the most fantastic places I've ever been. And we booked 3 weeks off work. And it's just vibrant, it's fast, it's exciting, there's loads going on. And when we went late 90s, we had, and this was pre-kids days, so holidays could be fun and explorational. And we had to tell the authorities where we were staying on our first night. But from then on, we could kind of play the network.
Yeah.
And one of the things about Cuba is that families are allowed to supplement their income by having house guests, and they're depending on the size of their property, they can have 1, 2, 3, 4 people. And so we'd gone to the train station to buy tickets to go somewhere, and asked this woman who was behind the desk, well, how do we find out about where do we stay? And she said, my family, you're going to stay with my family.
All right.
And it was brilliant. So we just moved around around her cousins and her aunties and uncles, and stayed in all these fantastic houses in the heart of Cuban towns and cities. We had the most amazing food. I never thought I'd say I would be sick of lobster, but we had lobster every night for $5. And just this mountain of food would appear every night because they were keen, it was cheapest tips for them, but also they wanted to impress their guests and make you stay. And I learned a little bit of Spanish, not enough, but enough to get me through.
Que magnifico.
Yeah.
Que bueno. My gosh, that just sounds so delightful to hear all of those dream travel locations and jealousy, right? Massive jealousy hitting me right now as I listen to some of those places, Maldives, Cuba, some of the brilliant places you've been. This one may be tricky then, because what is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
So, okay. So I want to go to Venice. I really want to go to Venice. Beautiful, beautiful city. And why haven't I been? It's on my doorstep. It's in Europe. It's probably a couple of hours plane rides. But I'm torn between being part of the tourist problem and not. But I really want to see it. So I might have to wait until I don't take the kids, and then I might feel as though there's.
I got to tell you, I think you should go. Just don't take a cruise ship, right? If anyone listening is part of the cruise industry, I apologize, but I feel like that's a real issue in Venice. And just like you said, the Maldives, who knows if we don't resolve this climate concerns, then my gosh, we're not going to have the Maldives, and we're not going to have Venice. And so we took our family there a few years ago, and pre-pandemic. And we were even saying to the kids, we don't know if you'll be able to see this city when you're an adult. So there is a little bit of that, but just try to go as low footprint as you possibly can, get local guides, support the local economy, and it'll make you feel good. Venice is a spectacular place. One of the things I loved about Venice was the food, and that's true of any sort of traveling. So I want to ask you, what is a favorite thing for you to eat?
Oh God, Rick, this is like asking me what's my death row meal.
Yes, but a little less dark, but sure.
And I've played that game many times. But I would have always said, I love food. a great steak would be my kind of favourite thing to eat. But I ran the customer acquisition program for an online butcher for 3 years, and I probably overdid it. So I'm going to go probably fish, and I'm going to be really, really boring and just say fish. But that could be lobster, crab, crayfish, pasta, good old fish and chips here in the UK. Good fish and chips you can't beat. But I won't eat jellied eels. I don't care whether I live in London or not. It's not.
And what is that?
Oh, it's like frog spawn in a pot. No, it's eel.
Okay.
In a kind of jelly that you might get in a pork pie. It's hot. Let's see, I'm pulling faces and you can't see me. But
I've never heard of this before.
Oh, okay. You need to Google jellied eels. But
I will definitely do so. Jellied eels. That may be my next exploratory meal. So who knows? This will be interesting. I doubt this is your answer to the next question, but let's see. What is a thing your parents forced you to eat, but you hated as a kid?
So actually, my parents were pretty good. We had a very simple Northern England English diet. So they didn't really force me to eat many things that I didn't like. The one thing I really hated as a kid, and I think it's one of the things I say to my kids all the time, is that you're supposed to try things at least 10 times before you write it off and say, I can't eat it, because your taste buds change all the time.
Right.
And as you grow and mature, you learn to like things. But as a kid, I hated tomatoes. I hated them. It was the seeds that born of the devil, just, nasty things. Why would you put seeds in things? But now you give me a fresh tomato, and if I smell of a really ripe fresh tomato, and I'll be dribbling. I love them now.
Yeah.
But I had to wean myself into eating them I would take the skin off and I would eat the flesh, but I wouldn't eat the seeds. And then I taught myself to eat the skin as well as the flesh, and now I can eat the seeds as well.
What an interesting your what is this, a tomato experience journey? Maybe we've come up with a new discipline here. I have heard quite a bit from guests that what they disliked as a kid, now they like today. I have some things that changed for me as well, and there are some things that have stayed definitely in my do not eat category, but tomatoes have evolved for you. That's good. Back to travel. What is, and it can't be your phone, it can't be your passport, what is one travel item you will not leave home without?
Okay, so I've mulled this one over, because obviously my phone would be my choice, because it's music and photographs and all sorts of stuff. And I'm toyed between my driving license, because if you can drive, you can go and explore off the beaten track places. But then I came back to my love of books. I'm a real lover of books, and I love the feel of paper and the smell of paper and the joy of being transported somewhere else in my mind. So even if I'm on a really boring train journey, I don't know, where do we go? Delhi to Calcutta, which was about 3.5 years as far as I remember. It was probably, I think it was a full 24-hour journey. But you just bring a book out and suddenly you can be somewhere else. So I would take my Kindle, and as much as I love real books, I can get millions of them, gazillions of them on a Kindle. And so I would take my book, and therefore I would be wherever I wanted to.
Elaine, I was thinking about something you said when we talked earlier, and it was, knowing that the customer should influence how we approach VOC, voice of the customer. I know it makes sense on the surface, but would you unpack it a little bit? Take us kind of beyond the pithy phrase of knowing the customer should influence how you approach VOC, but really, how does knowing the customer influence how you approach voice of the customer?
Oh, okay. So voice of the customer for me is like the heartbeat of your activity. So that heartbeat has to pump day in, day out. This is not we do it and then we stop and then we learn the results from it. And because if the heartbeat's not going, you're not learning. So it has to be an ongoing, continuous activity. And I think you have to listen. I keep coming back to listening. And one of Stephen Covey's 7 principles is around listening, and listening not to prepare your answer, which is what most of us do. Most of us are listening to respond.
Right.
And actually this is about listening to hear and understand. And so I think, you have to drop all your assumptions, and you have to come at it with a fresh pair of eyes and a clean mind, no preconceptions, no assumptions. What are the customers going to tell me? And so the only way, we found that the best way of doing that is to actually have the customer as much as possible, or in the room. And so get their voices, get their opinions. And I don't mean physically dragging them into the room, although many of them would be tempted to come and tell you if they've had a good or a bad experience, but the ones in the middle. So how we approach that is to try and capture those in the moment customer experiences. So if we are doing what we call an experience audit, it sounds terribly clipboardish, but it's not. It's about trying to capture those moments as the customer goes through their journey. And so we might use video, and they might record what they're doing, but actually we're not recording their faces, we're recording the activities they're doing and their voice track along the way. So they can be going, well, where the hell's this button? What do you mean I haven't put my password in properly? Why are you telling me I've got it wrong? I haven't even answered it yet. Come on. And you gather all that insight, and then we take that into the boardroom and show, and that's how it helps people understand why, when I say it's frustrating when they're being asked to enter a password and you tell them they've got it wrong, because you can't deny somebody's voice and opinion. And when you hear it, that's why it's the voice of the customer is so important. It's not a misunderstanding, because you can hear the emotion, not just the words.
Yeah, there's so much to that. I think, we talk about it's a cliche at this point, but the empty chair that Amazon uses at its meetings. And I've used a similar approach at other clients, but really just how can we bring that customer's actual voice into the room to remind people that are disconnected from the actual customer just because of either hierarchy or role, to this is what the customer's actually saying. I'm glad you brought us there. Well, we've talked a lot about companies that need to do better about listening and that sort of thing, but I want to talk about a business that really knows their customer, not a specific business, but I know you've talked about companies that they should be able to identify customers who are in distress and reach out, proactively to address concerns, not wait for the customer to reach out with a concern, a complaint, an issue, but rather, even reach out to the customer before even the customer knows there's an issue. Tell me more about that approach.
So I learned this in my early days when I worked for a wine company, a mail order wine company. Okay. And we had a customer who was a relatively new customer, but he bought a few bottles of wine and he really liked what we had to offer. And his daughter was getting married. So he organised, he said, I want to supply the wine. We've got the venue, we're having it in the barn in the farm or wherever up the road. And I want to buy my wine from you. And it was a big order and it was a big day for him. And our head of contact centre watched that order every inch of its journey to make sure it left the warehouse. She went down and supervised it being packed. She made sure she did spot checks on the bottles, and she kept track with the couriers. And, it arrived and it was going in a depot to be sorted and distributed out the next morning, and it got lost. So it arrived at the depot, but it never left the depot. And we didn't know where it went. So she was like, okay. So because she'd proactively been watching it, she knew it. So she went down to the warehouse, she phoned a cab, repacked the order, got in a black cab and drove up to the wedding venue with a taxi full of wine and arrived and said to the guy, he said, I've just had a message to say, I'm not getting my wine, and yet you're here. And she said, because I knew it was a problem, so I brought it up for you and I will recover the rest of it from wherever it's gone. That's not your problem. Your focus for today is to have a fantastic experience, enjoy your daughter's wedding. And he couldn't have been happier.
Of course.
And it was about building a relationship with a potential customer, because he was going to be a customer who would have wandered off and disappeared into the ether without having ruined his daughter's wedding. Who wants to get married with no wine? But and she solved that problem. And it really struck a chord with me about actually we have to be proactive. And if you are a new business owner and you've got your first business, you care about that. You would watch every order, you would hand pack it, you would give them a big kiss on the cheek or whatever you might do to say thank you. And that's how we should treat every customer. We should look after them all, because you never know whether they're going to be a big or a small customer. And I had another example, having been through that, working with a charity. And we were handling donations from an appeal, and the donor had called in and was going to make a £2.50 donation. And it was my training had been around, let's focus on that donor, and £2.50 for them might be an enormous amount of money. It's not for me, for lots of us, but for that donor, and we need to sound grateful. And they had this fantastic conversation with the donor. And the team leader was going, "Oh, why it's taking so long? Why are they taking so long on this call? It's only for £2.50." And it's like, no, but this,
yeah,
just be grateful. The chap wants to have a chat. 3 weeks later, he phoned, he'd sold his house and he donated £250,000 on the back of that conversation.
Wow.
Because he'd felt warm, he'd felt welcomed. He wasn't in a position to give more than £2.50 because he was worried about where his money was going, but he'd sold his house for a lot more money than he thought he would. And he'd been so impressed by the agent giving him time, information, and just being really genuinely grateful that he phoned and made a £250,000 donation.
Wow. Boy, that
you just never know.
You never know. And what I'm hearing in the answer to that question is this idea of pay attention to your customers, right? And it is not, in situation one, it was, look, this is a high potential customer. We're going to watch this order very tightly. In scenario two, it's just treat every customer, regardless of where they are in that high potential or whatever, with heart and concern, and who knows where they may be. And I realize that the first story that you have is not scalable without tools, but there are tools out there to even do that, as long as a company chooses to build that preemptive strike approach of, I'm going to pay attention before the customer knows that it's time to pay attention. And there are tools out there. Ido Hakohen, let's see, he was a few episodes ago, maybe episode 30, 34, something like that, talked about that same thing of contacting a customer before they even call in when a shipment is late or those sorts of things. So Elaine,
that's then your customer knows that you really are interested in them and their product, or and their purchase, because you've proactively been watching it.
It's amazing what happens when you deliver some heart to the customer, right?
So be in the moment with your customers and live and feel it. How would you feel if your delivery didn't arrive, and if it was for your daughter's wedding, or it was
I would feel really angry. I might be driving down to that warehouse myself. Well, Elaine, this conversation's been brilliant. I've enjoyed it. I loved talking about so much about voice of the customer. I loved hearing about the heart for the customer. And you know me, I loved hearing your travel stories. And yes, I'm still jealous that you got to go to Cuba, but hopefully someday the political realities will be resolved and I'll be able to experience something similar. I do want to let folks know, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you, your company, and how you do things?
So I have a website, and it's a long and complicated name, but it's actually 3 surnames all slammed together.
Okay.
So we are Reynolds Busby Lee. So surnames Reynolds Busby Lee, and it's a .com.
Okay.
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And where else can you find me? Generally anywhere and everywhere. Facebook, Twitter.
Well, I'll make sure that the website and LinkedIn get into the show notes. So if you're listening to this and you want to see that complex, the 3 names wedged together so that you reach out to Elaine, just head over to those show notes and you'll get a link there. Elaine, enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me on CX Passport today. I do hope that you have a great rest of your day and get out there on the road soon.
Thank you. It's been great, Rick. Always is. I love talking to you. Take care.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX4CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX4CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.